Now have a quorum, so I would like to reopen the meeting that was adjourned from last Tuesday. So I declare the special meeting of the CFG, which has been reconvened, open, and advise that this meeting will be recorded and streamed live to the City of Adelaide website. Please note that an audio and visual recording is being taken of this meeting. This means that your presence at and any contribution you make to the meeting may be collected, used, disclosed or published publicly by the Council, including transferring outside Australia. Members, as part of the previous agenda, we had already completed our acknowledgement of country, so I'll move on to apologies and leave of absence, of which there are none. Members, is there anyone present who wishes to declare a conflict of interest? There are no conflicts of interest. There are no deputations. As you'll be aware, tonight is a workshop. There's clearly a significant issue that we need to be aware of in terms of potential implications of rising fuel prices in the context of our budget for FY27, with the focus here primarily being on inflation, but we'll obviously cover other topics as well. I hand over to Mrs. Spitalis to lead us into agenda item 5.1.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight, again, as we start each of these workshops, is just to show our progress to date. But tonight, I guess, as the Chair has alluded to, there's probably something else that we need to consider as part of our budget process, given that inflation at the moment is exceeding our previous forecasts. I mean, even before the Middle East conflict, inflation was on the way up, if you have a look at what was happening in December, January and February. And given that inflation is a key underlying assumption within our budget, it does affect particular costs and revenues. It's probably timely that we have a look at it. Oops, sorry. Tonight, as you'd all be aware, the economic environment seems to be changing daily almost, with different responses from different levels of government. Tonight we want to explore some of these, but we really want your views on inflation, where you feel it might be headed, and if we need to take this into consideration to finalise the budget for 26-27. In terms of just reiterating our current base budget position and some of the underlying assumptions, the draft budget that was recently presented does assume a CPI indexation of 2.5%, which was based on the latest known information we had at the time that we started the budget process. The general rates revenue, which is, I think, one that I just want to explore a little bit further or labour a little bit, is that the current base budget that has been proposed has a rates revenue increase of 5.1%. Now, it's important to note that whilst CPI underpins that to some degree in terms of our assumptions, there's also, for those members that have been along for the ride, we also have an asset renewal repair fund component of 2.1%, which was a short-lived 3-year initiative to allow us to fund, from a cash perspective, the difference between our AMPs a couple of years ago. This is the 3rd year of that, and then the other component that makes up that 5.1% is the 0.5% allocation to, as part of our transition over 8 years to get to 100% asset renewal funding ratio. Those 3 components combined is what makes up the 5.1% rate revenue increase that's in the current budget. We also assume in the current budget growth from new developments at 1.5%, which is up from 1% that we have traditionally included. It's important to note that fees and charges, a lot of them are increased, increases are linked to CPI. We have 39 strategic projects within the current budget of 9.4 million net cost. We have some service changes that we've shared with you that are embedded with a total net cost of 1.746 million, but the key underlying target operating position is currently achieved with the current budget as it's proposed.
Mr. Batalis, can I just confirm the 5.1%, that is as per our currently published long-term financial plan?
That is correct, yeah. This slide arises from a question that we received at the Audit and Risk Committee, which was asking for a breakdown of the 165 million or the 164.761 that has been seen in reports. It's important to provide you this context because it is made up of a range of different components, the first one being the general rates revenue from existing properties. Now that 5.1% there, you can see that reiterated in that second column. That is what existing ratepayers we are proposing to increase their rate revenue by. On top of that, we do have the growth from new properties. So once we set the level of rates for the existing ratepayers, we apply the same level of rates to those new properties, which generates about 1.5% in revenue for us. The general, the rates increase from existing ratepayers. Yep. The other part that's in there is the couple of levies that we have within our budget, the regional landscape levy, which is effectively a pass-through for state government. We collect it on behalf of state government. We pay exactly that amount to the state government, so it's neutral from that perspective. And then also forming part of that 165 million is the separate rate that we have for the Rundle Mall. In addition to that, year on year we do receive fines and interest on overdue rates, and it would be remiss of us not to build that into the budget given that we do receive them year on year. I think the other part I want to just explore on this slide is there is sometimes a misconception that if valuations increase across the city that we get a windfall. That is not correct. That may have been the way the City of Adelaide rated a few years ago. Yeah, but these days what we do is we look at what is the budget that we want to achieve, how much revenue do we need to fund that budget, and then it's I guess there's a machination then between the level of valuation increase versus rate in a dollar. So, for example, if we wanted to raise rates by 5.1%, but valuations in general went up 6%, we would reduce the rate in the dollar to make sure we only raise the revenue we want. Conversely, if valuations only go up 4% and we need to raise 5.1% in rate, we would increase the rate in the dollar to balance out. So it is a fairly simple math equation in terms of how the rate in the dollar and the valuations interplay with each other, but we do not get a windfall just from increases in valuations.
Members, what we'll do in terms of discussion around this tonight is we'll take questions at the end of every slide. I understand that there will be some, there's quite a lot of detail here, and then I'll seek feedback at the end. We can provide comments. So, Councillor Davis, I understand you have a question.
I do, I suppose, take issue with the inclusion of growth from new properties being included afterwards. So normally, because a new property, for example, we don't necessarily collect their rubbish. We don't actually necessarily see an increase of cost of $2 million as a result of the new properties being in there. The parkland's the same size, everything's the same size. We have the same libraries, we have all that kind of stuff. So normally, my understanding is that method is applied across all the properties to obtain the 148 million, and then the council decides. So I don't understand why the 1.5 is separated out. In my view, it should be included with this is what we need this year to run our budget of 148 mil, and then you apply that method, new properties or not.
Yeah. You may recall from very early on in this term, we took council members through the existing rate base from 10 years ago, and every year on year, there was growth. As a result of that, those existing ratepayers, and I think you've heard the Lord Mayor mention it on more than one occasion, the existing ratepayer rates actually dropped during that period because we had significant growth in that period. And in effect, the new properties were subsidising to some degree the existing properties. So what we've tried to do is to say, here are your existing ratepayers. To maintain the same level of service for those properties, we need to increase our rates by whatever the percentage is that council agrees. However, there are new properties coming on that also need servicing, so we're taking the same level of rates for the existing to fund those. Now, whilst we may be a little bit different to another metro council where we have more properties along a street, for example, the intensity of our development means that our roads and our footpaths get used more intensely than some other metro councils. And so, I think where you're going to is, do we need all that money to do that? There is good evidence to suggest that each dollar that we raise from new property pretty much goes back to servicing those new properties.
Okay, and that's my point. That is that true? Because what I want to know as a councillor is there creep? And to what extent is the creep? And so really what we need to know, I feel, is what is the, if there is a new property, so there's one extra house in the city, how much extras does the council spend to maintain the entire city as a result of that? And to my mind, it wouldn't be 2.2. I don't think it would be anywhere near that amount. And so what I'm concerned about is in the way that this has been formulated, is I as a councillor don't really understand what the growth of the cost of the city is, because it's being distorted from the growth of new properties in this way. So I would suggest that what you're seeking is a 6.6% total rates revenue increase, and that should be the figure that's presented to us, or set out exactly how much the cost per resident really is as a minimum level.
Can I suggest, sorry, Mr. Patalis, can I suggest, I don't think that's, take the question, Councillor Davis, but I don't think we'll get an answer to that one tonight. We do want to talk about assumptions around CPI and inflation, so we'll take that as a question on notice and come back with a response. Is that fair, Mr. Patalis?
That's fair in terms of that specific question. However, I just still want to point out that we have deliberately separated the existing from the new, so it's really transparent for our existing ratepayers. In terms of the proposed changes...
Sorry, before we move on, Mr. Patalis, I had a question from Councillor Mark.
I just want to check my maths here on that previous slide. The rates growth for new properties, 2.2, is 1.5% of what?
Of the 25-26 general rates revenue.
So it's not 1.5% of the 25-26 plus the increase.
So is your question, is it 1.5% of 148 million or 155? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Because surely if they're a new property, they'll be paying the rate at the new rate.
Yeah.
Right.
So can we just clarify that, Mrs. Patalis? Is it of the 148.4 or the 155.9?
I think the CEO is doing the calculation.
Oh, sorry, no, it wouldn't be of 155.9, it'd be of 148 plus 3.7.
Oh, that's a good point.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. The growth should be added on after. The general rates revenue increase of 5.1 should be added to the new base.
Yeah, because the growth of new properties in the following year that we're paying the new rate, they won't be paying the rate of the previous year.
I can see the calculators coming out. Suggest we move on from this one.
1.5% of the 148,400, which is the existing rate base.
Yes.
But then the 5.1 is applied to those properties again.
No. So what happens is with the 148.4 and the 5.1%, let's say that comes up with an average rates bill of $2,000 for a property, we would then apply that average $2,000 rate probably to the new property. So it's not over and above.
Yeah, but then to Patrick's point is that it's now on lower rates on the 25-26 point, not on the new rate.
No, it's the same. Through the presiding member, it's the same rate in the dollar. So whatever the rate in the dollar is struck is applied to both existing properties and new properties.
Yes, no, I understand. I think that's my point, right? So these new properties, they don't exist in 25-26, they exist in 26-27, right?
Correct.
So they're paying the percentage rate in 26-27. But this mathematics in front of me shows them paying it based as if they were paying in 25-26.
Yes.
On the 1st of July 2026.
So shouldn't that 2.2 million in the fifth row down, should that not be 2.28?
No, look, whatever the number is, we calculate the growth from the existing rate base, not what we're increasing 26, 27 by.
Can I suggest that I understand this is important, but we also want to get to talk about inflation. If there are further questions around this, can we take that on notice and come back with an explanation?
Maybe I'll come back to the same question at slide 15, because that's where I've actually picked this up.
Great.
So.
Okay, and I do want to provide time for comments at the end, noting that we need to get in the chamber by 6:30. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So taking that assumption into account, the 2.5% was based on the best known data that we had at that point in time. In those second lot of, the first lot of dot points there, you can see how inflation has been moving, and this again is prior to the Middle East conflict. Based on the Middle East conflict and the impact on fuel and then the flow-on effects that fuel has onto many other supplies, some banks are predicting that may hit 5%. What we are suggesting as a proposed change, and we'll explain in more depth in later slides, is looking at increasing that CPI assumption, underlying assumption in our budget from 2.5% to 3.5%. It does impact our rates, revenue and fees and charges, particularly the rates revenue in terms of that build-up that I just talked about on the previous slide. Some of our fees and charges are linked directly to CPI, and also they are linked to our FTE that are providing some of those related services. Materials, contracts and other expenses. There are some contracts that we have that are linked to CPI, and therefore there is a direct pass-through in terms of our costs. And our depreciation also gets impacted where we increase CPI in terms of the way we undertake our desktop valuations of our assets in those periods where we don't go out for full-blown valuations. So in terms of the impact, we'll explore a little bit in a little bit more detail, more specifically how they play out. But the other key understanding is that our current targeted operating position, you would have heard me say on many occasions that needs to be at a level sufficient to ensure that we cover our principal and interest repayments on any debt, new debt that we borrow in a given year. Given that at the moment our current forecast indicates that our borrowings will not be at the levels that we had predicted at the start of the year, there is a resultant revision to our principal and interest requirements, which has a downward impact on those. So it's in slow motion, this. There we go. Just a graphical representation of the different sources that we have for CPI. I mean, of note is that red line there, which is our forecast, which is in our long-term financial plan, and the 26-27 budget, which are all below current forecast by the independent bodies. I think of note though is the RBA's revision of its forecast in February from November, which is significantly higher than they had been forecasting, not just for the current year but for a couple of the ensuing years. And then also I think the SASIS forecast for LGPI, which is probably based on a local government sector or basket of goods, is also significantly higher than some of the other forecasts as well.
RBA is saying.
Do you have a question there, Councillor Douglas?
The RBA is
Just
saying.
put the microphone on.
RBA is saying 4.2 in June, then it's 3.6 in December, and then June 27 and December 27 are going to be 2.9 and 2.7%. So I'm struggling to reconcile why we care what NAB thinks, which is just one bank, versus what the RBA thinks and what everyone else is saying.
Yeah, through the chair, I'll put them deliberately in inverted commas to show they are just opinions.
So we've got some commentary here to sit alongside the numbers.
But in the past, we use SASIS forecast as for our CPI. They're around that 3%.
All right, let's get rolling.
In terms of the current economic environment, I think the key points here is that there are different responses from different levels of government. The first point up there, I guess, is dictating the federal government's current response, noting that the next 3 bullet points are where the government has intervened to directly reduce costs at the Bowser. They've also looked at, facilitating businesses in terms of particularly around underwriting of additional fuel cargoes in the current environment. But also, I think the other and the 5th point there is that the freeing up of fuel from existing reserves. So sorry, this is. In terms of the state government position, the Department of Energy and Mining, they are not panicking at all at this stage, and they are suggesting that it's more of a distribution issue than a supply issue at this point in time. Not so with the public. The public is out there in some places panic buying, but I think that has also settled a little bit in the last week or two. In terms of the fuel suppliers, you would have seen that some stations had run out of fuel, but that is a factor of suppliers prioritising their long-term contract customers over the spot market. And I guess in response to that, the Premier and Treasurer have started holding weekly Monday round table meetings, and again, there does not seem to be any level of panic at this point in time. The Local Government Association has been offered a seat at that weekly round table and are in there advocating on behalf of local government.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
I've got a media release from Business Chamber Business SA, which flies in the face of some of that, and some interesting statistics from businesses. So that makes me uncomfortable because these are the people on the ground, and it really does fly in the face of them.
Of what?
So you're suggesting that there is
more of an
worse
issue.
position than is presented here, Deputy Lord Mayor?
I'm happy to share this media release, which has got quite a lot of stats, which is a fuel survey response highlights impact on SA business, which was only released on 5th of April. And it is really quite concerning what's happening on the ground and the impact it's going to be having on development and all sorts of areas.
Did you say that was from 5th of April?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure members would be interested in that. I can see a few nods around the room, so if you could share that.
I had it ready to actually send everybody, and I haven't yet, but I'll send it before the council meeting.
Thank you. Mrs. Vitalis, back to you.
Thank you. So in the current economic environment, the LGA advice at the moment is really to stay the course, and I guess reading between the lines is be wary about any try-ons at the moment. There are lots of examples of where companies are using the increase in fuel to try and renegotiate pricing in contracts. At the moment, we are taking a business as usual approach to that. We have contractual obligations in place. We will obviously take into account any impact on suppliers that are genuinely feeling it and are critical to what we need to supply and deliver. However, we still are taking our financial management obligations seriously in terms of we're looking for financial sustainability, value for money, and also looking out for ratepayer funds in terms of any of those requests that are coming through. In terms of our response, you can see the bullet points in there in terms of, and particularly this is with a lot of our outward-looking services that we are providing. Those first 3 bullet points are looking at how we are, rationalising the way we deliver our services to ensure the lowest impact possible on us while still maintaining those front-facing, outwardly facing services that the community expect of us. I think the other key point to make on this slide is that we have built some agility into our position in terms of being able to respond to different requirements as they may come up. But again, and obviously I think Deputy Lord Mayor might disagree again, but I don't think we're at panic stations just yet. There is a supply shock happening. around the globe, but I think not only the federal government but ourselves and the state government, we are monitoring daily the impacts, and we do have the ability to, I guess, switch it up if we need to.
Yeah, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Comment on that. At the end of the day, it's not about panic stations, it's about forward planning and business contingency. That's where I'm coming from. And being able to scale up and scale down when we can, and when we have to.
In terms of the impact on our 26-27 budget that we're proposing, I talked about those contractual impacts that are driven by CPI. So where we are aware of contracts that are driven by increases in CPI, we have we will build that into those budget lines. In addition to that, we do have non-contractual impacts, and what we have done as part of what we're presenting later, excuse me, in the slides, is that for those budget allocations that aren't linked to CPI, we are holding the line at the 2.5% increase, and we will be expecting programs to look at how they deliver the same level of services for that reduced amount of funding. In terms of non-discretionary cost impacts, there are utilities, insurances, statutory fees that are beyond our control that are driven by CPI. Where we have identified those in our budget, we have increased them by 3.5% as well. And as I explained before, depreciation is also impacted by CPI in terms of the way we undertake valuations of our infrastructure to ensure that our replacement costs are reflected in our budget and in our long-term plan.
Councillor Davis.
So does that mean that the administration, that means the administration is forecasting a CPI increase of 3.5%?
That's the proposal, yeah.
Right.
So that where that plays out, we, in our budget, and has impacts in our budget, the inflation has impacts, we are suggesting we should be reflecting that in our budget going forward, because that is our best, I guess, estimate of what those costs will be.
Yeah, sure. So that's what, yeah, okay.
I'll just clarify, so up until now we've had 2.5% baked in. The question tonight is, should it be different than that? Recommendation administration is 3.5%.
But not across the board.
But not across the board. Thank you, CEO. Councillor Martin?
And that's informed by the SACES forecast? Because that's the number that's changed from 2.5 and in this slide's 3.4.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, largely driven by SACES, but also we do take into account all of those other sources as well. So the SACES is the one that we have traditionally adopted. Excuse me.
So the headline number of rates increase of 5.1 to 5.6, it's not really accurate. It's actually this internal part of it. It's a component.
Will explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll come back to that on slide 14. Councillor Martin, I have a question for you.
Oh, wait.
You're happy to wait? Okay, slide 14. We're building up for slide 14, Mr. Spitales.
Wait. In terms of just continuing on the impact on our budget, fees and charges, some are linked to CPI, some are linked to the cost of delivering that service, whether that's through people or materials and other contracts. So where we have identified those, we are intending to increase those fees and charges also by the 3.5%. Where there is a current agreement in place that differs from that 3.5%, we naturally have to honour those agreements, and that particularly a good example of that is our property leases. And where fees and charges are aligned to market conditions, we will adjust them as well. But we also need to take into account when we are charging fees that we are bound by the principle of competitive neutrality, and so we cannot purposely undercut the commercial market. In terms of operational expenditure, again, we've increased that where there is CPI indexation, particularly around waste collection and security contracts. So there's a $334,000 impact to our budget there. Some utilities have been increased by CPI. We are looking to manage those as cost pressures through our quarterly budget process. The regional landscape levy has come in lower than we had originally anticipated, so we've also reflected that in the budget, which has provided us with $142,000 benefit that we can use to offset the impact of CPI increases, and then finance costs for the right of use assets has a minor impact of $25,000. In terms of asset valuations, again, I apologise, it's the third time I mentioned depreciation, but the flow through of increasing our valuations by 3.5% versus 2.5% has a direct impact on our depreciation of $493,000.
Just to clarify, Mr. Patalis, as well, in terms of operational expenditure impact, we're essentially saying the total of that is 334,000 plus the 25,000 minus 142,000.
Yeah.
So that's the net. That sum there is the net operational expenditure.
Correct.
Yeah. Lord Mayor.
Is it the landscape levy hypothecated?
Yeah, through the chair, it is, but we have since received what the actual figure will be for 26-27, and we're now reflecting that. So we had increased that by a percentage that hasn't actually isn't actually the case with what we will be charged.
But the key point through the presiding member, it's revenue in and expenditure out at an equivalent level.
Yeah. In terms of the proposed base budget position, is we are suggesting, even with the impact of the increased CPI, that we can, rather than if we use the same formula that we did before in terms of CPI plus budget repair plus the asset renewal funding transition, we would be looking at a 6.1% increase through the, through the avoided increases that I talked about, not increasing those every line from 2.5% to 3.5%. We've been able to avoid a $306,000 increase. And also, given that we do have some margin in our budget in terms of we're suggesting a $5.3 million surplus, means that our revenues are in excess of our expenses. There has been some inherent benefit in increasing CPI through that. As a result of that, we have been able to limit the general rates revenue increase at 5.6% rather than the expected 6.1% if we followed the same process.
Mr. Patalis, I'm going to suggest, I know we're going to get a lot of questions on this slide, but there is only one slide after this to come. Can you speak to both of those slides? Then I'm going to go around the room and seek feedback.
Yeah. So in terms of how a 5.6% rate revenue increase plays out, you can see in that right-hand column there, in bold, the 3.5%. So we have built that into the increase. We've still got the 2.1% budget repair component in there. Again, like I said, for the final year, we have the 0.5% asset renewal repair funding transition amount. However, we have been able to, through the different aspects that I've described to date, being able to reduce that the rate revenue by 0.5%. That's $742,000. Please don't mistake that with the AIDA allocation. It just so happens that they were both based on 0.5%. So effectively, that 5.6%, whilst not 6.1%, is still driven by the 3.5% CPI index, and there's been some other minor impacts that result in us being able to balance that budget at 5.6%.
Wonderful. So we'll now take further questions and feedback. I'm going to allocate 3 minutes per member as we go around. The reason for that is that'll take us a little bit past 6:30. We need to be in the chamber by 7 at the latest to start the council meeting. However, we do have 2 deputations, Lord Mayor, I understand. We don't want to keep them waiting. So we'll allocate 3 minutes for each member to provide either further questions or feedback. Happy you're willing to kick off. Councillor Davis.
Can I ask a question?
Question and comments, but we're going to keep it at 3 minutes, combination of both.
I can't skip then. Why?
You're welcome to skip. I'm happy to come back. Councillor Abraham today.
I'm happy to skip as well.
Oh, wonderful. I've just gained 6 minutes. Councillor Kabata. Okay, 9 minutes. Councillor Marr, you have 12 minutes to speak. No, sorry, you've got 3 minutes.
Same question again. So on this slide 15, I think it's easy to see what I'm talking about. On the left, we have the growth of new properties, 2.2 mil, and on the right, it's the same value, 2.2. I don't understand why we're not calculating that number based on the payable rate in the 26-27 financial year. So that 2.2 in the right column, the 5.6 projected budget, I think that should be 2.3 or 4.
Yeah.
Is that what you would expect it to wash out as by the time we get to the end of that year?
I think the best way to answer this is that the 2.2 million is our estimate of what growth will be. We then simply show that as a percentage of the existing rate base. So the growth will be, at the end of the day, whatever new properties we have. So we are making an estimate at this point in time. It could end up being 3.3 million. It could end up being 1.5 million.
So that 1.5% is a baked-in estimate.
It's
right.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense then as to why it's only based on the previous year.
But growth has been probably travelling somewhere between 1.5 and 2% the last couple of years. So it'll be whatever it will be.
Right.
But we've taken what we think is a reasonably conservative estimate of what that might be at this point in time.
So there's no way that that growth value, if that is a conservative estimate, and it's also based on the previous year's rate, we would expect to see that as a larger number once this washes out.
Sorry, say that again, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The preparation of the budget is predicated on an assumption about growth in new properties. Okay, we've assumed an assumption of 1.5%, which mathematically gives you $2.2 million. If in the final return of the valuations, the properties, the new growth properties significantly exceeded that 1.5%, there would be an opportunity to revisit the underlying assumption for existing properties. Okay? But we've set a baseline assumption about existing properties and new properties. When the valuations come in, we can provide some further advice, but we need to build the base budget on firm assumptions about existing properties and a reasonable assumption about growth from new properties. Okay. And the maths all flows from that, based on valuations and rate in the dollar.
Yeah, Councillor Marr, we've got about a minute to go.
Okay. Maybe just a clarification question to check my understanding. The left column, the 5.1, that's with the 2.5%, and that's baked in across the board. The right column with the 5.6 is with the 3.5% in some lines, but not all. And where it's not 3.5, it's still 2.5.
Yeah, through the
Through the presiding member, what that table presents is a starting assumption around a baseline CPI adjustment of 3.5, noting that that 3.5 has not been applied to all costs in the budget.
Yes.
We've got the mitigating 0.5% reduction.
Yep.
So the 3.5 is effectively 3. Okay?
Because it's not applied to, say, from slide 14, the fees and charges.
It's not applied to all
That's right.
costs.
Councillor Marr, I'm going to need to move us along.
Well, I'll answer
have some
your
time free, I think, at the end.
last question. The question that you asked is, what are your views? I think what you've done by not applying it as a blanket across is really quite clever. As long as that 3.5 doesn't go up, I don't really see a problem with this. This is effectively just doing what we were doing before, but aligning it to the CPI.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Councillor Marr. Note that as a comment at the end there. Councillor Freeman.
I actually have no questions or comments. Thanks, Chair. That was a very clear presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Councillor Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm still forming a view. I don't underestimate the consequences of what's happening in terms of the national and international economy. I am one of a very small number of people in this room who lived through the last one in the 70s and remember the extent to which it wrought havoc on the national economy, not least to mortgage holders, which I was at the time. And yet, I am of the view that we are still in the early days of this crisis, and that it is extremely difficult to anticipate whether the impact on the CPI would be 3.5%, 4.5%, 6%. No one knows. And indeed, the 3.5% that's being proposed is a bit of a hypothesis. And I think, moreover, that in circumstances where this city has generally applied rating increases prospectively, we are now moving to a position where we're anticipating the rate increase based on the calculations of many organisations, including the RBA. I think possibly I would like more information. I'd like to understand precisely the projections from a variety of sources. I'd like to understand more about where it's proposed to apply the increases, whether it applies not only to the examples that have been given, but to ones that haven't been given, charges that flow not only to ratepayers, to businesses, also to events, things of that nature, which rely on council services and council properties. I just don't have a view at the moment, other than I think we ought to approach this with a great deal of caution.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Deputy Lord Mayor.
I have a question about the 0.5% input of rate relief. How is that calculated? Who benefits? Can I have a bit more information on that?
Yeah, through the chair. So effectively, we went through all of the machinations that I described. So we looked at how we build up our proposed rate revenue increase. We looked at what cost items we have applied CPI to, whether we apply the 3.5, the 2.5, whatever. Once we did all that, we actually found that we actually ended up with a larger surplus than we needed to service our debt and build that up. And it just so happened to come out at 0.5%. It wasn't contrived in any way. We worked through all those processes, and I think one of the underlying principles that I think we've offered to you throughout the last 3 or 4 years is that we look at the impacts on all other components within the budget, and then lastly we consider rate as the item to get us to where we need to be. In this instance, it meant that we didn't need the full 6.1% increase to still balance the budget.
Okay. So I've got a couple more minutes, or 1 more minute. I think this workshop is saying, okay, 2.5% might be too low, 3.5% might be the sweet spot. And, given the data that we actually have at the moment, that could be, it could be realistic, but at the end of the day, it's still a forecast decision, isn't it? So I think if inflation falls quickly, if things change to the positive, we may be putting too much in our budget or increasing our rates at a high percentage. So, but if inflation does increase to 5%, what's our contingency plan there? What do we do at that point in time if that's a real possibility? And what does that mean to our operating surplus?
Through the chair, knowing the CEO, he will still be expecting the organisation to hit that operating target operating position. And so what that would mean is we would need to, on a quarterly basis, continually review and monitor to ensure that we are delivering, I guess, on those critical services, and then having a look at how we might be able to deliver those same services for less cost. The same will happen on the capital side, because we would be expecting increases in capital as well. It means that $100 in an inflationary environment may not buy as much as it did. So we would potentially be looking to, and again, I don't want to put words in Tom's mouth, but we would be looking to re-scope some of those projects, because we have budgets in place. Where it made sense to maybe continue to deliver the same scope, but it would cost us more, we would naturally bring those types of decisions back to council through that quarterly review process. But I guess, like you're saying, trying to predict where this will land is almost impossible. The economists, I think, will struggle to do it. We just need to understand that we do have that quarterly budget review process where we can continually refine what we deliver at points in time to still hit our targets.
Deputy Lord Mayor, I'm keen to continue moving us along. CEO, did you want to provide a full stop on that, and then we'll continue on?
Just in terms of the assumption around the 3.5, the key aspect of this workshop is explaining the fact that the base budget was built based on a 2.5% CPI increase. In the rates equations, there are overlays around asset renewal, etc. Importantly, that 2.5 compares to a December 25 CPI increase for Adelaide of 3.3, a January assessment of 3.5, and a February assessment of 3.4. So every one of those numbers has a 3 in front of it. I'm not a betting man, I can't afford to be, but we are effectively 3 weeks away from a March CPI figure. I think that will provide some improved certainty for council regarding the underlying CPI increase assumption in the business plan and budget, noting that through this iteration we have insulated ratepayers by 0.5%.
So, CEO, are you suggesting we should be waiting for 3 weeks before we confirm our CPI?
I'm just trying to contextualise where we're at in the journey.
Yep.
Everything in front of us, everything we've been presented in the last 3 months is around an inflation forecast in excess of 3%.
Okay, great. Thank you, CEO. I'm going to keep moving us along. Lord Mayor?
I have sympathy with Councillor Martin, because whether we're talking about the oil shocks in the last century or the GFC or COVID, it's a possibility that we could be at the beginning of something worse. And our business involves not just fuel prices, but it involves oil products like asphalt, tar, road materials, plastics. And so our cost of doing business, I suspect, is going up in terms of materials much more than 3.5. And that being the case, if the CPI does go up more, and I think there is a potential for that, my view is that if we can keep our rates increase down to 5.6, we will be doing a good job. Because I think the cost of doing business may well be higher than the basket of goods in a CPI measurement, and it may be quite different from the way we're predicting action now. So I think keeping it down to 5.6 will be a target that we should all try to reach, irrespective of how high the CPI goes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Kouros?
I can only speak actually as a business owner, where they are feeling the effects of what is happening right now, but whereas we're not increasing any of our way of doing business, we're cutting costs because of this uncertainty at the moment. I kind of agree both with Councillor Martin and the Lord Mayor, we're just jumping a gun a little bit, and I just think we just need to wait a bit. We've gone through difficult times before. I think whilst I don't remember 1970, I do remember paying, don't remember that, but I do remember paying 18% for my first interest rate for my first home. There are bumps that we have all experienced, and I think we just are jumping the gun. Although this is a great report, this is great to do, I understand why you need to do it, but I'm not willing to give a comment on going forward and increasing anything at the present moment.
Thank you,
We'll wait 3 weeks and we'll see what the bet is.
Thank you, Councillor Keris. Councillor Giles?
Yeah, look, I don't have anything to add for what people have already said. I think we're sort of forming a view here. I just want to say that I do remember 1975 petrol things, because my dad used to, because we lived in Aldgate, used to cruise down the hill without putting the engine on, which was quite possible because there wasn't enough petrol. So
Hope they're good
we
brakes.
might, I don't think we'll get to that just yet.
That would have been the days of Devil's Elbow, but that could have been
Yes, it
nasty.
was.
Councillor Snape?
Nothing to add, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So while it's passing through to me, and I'm conscious I wanted to provide councillors on my right an opportunity to comment. And if I summarise the feedback we've heard so far, the general sentiment appears to be seeking more information, still forming a view. I think there's interest in the CPI data that will come out in approximately 3 weeks' time. Just to share my view as we're going through here, is that our practice to date, my recollection in developing every budget, is we have looked to SACE's forecast to set our underlying CPI figures. So to me, it would be entirely consistent to continue to look to do that with how we've set every other budget in this council. And on that basis, that would suggest or imply 3.5%, but also respect that the mood in the room is to look to wait for more data. But 3.5, I would note that that is consistent with that. The other thing I would note is that, when we're looking at potential rate increases, I'm very mindful that 2.6% of what we have in front of us is actually related to budget repair, and we haven't heard that term. I know not everyone likes that term, but that's 2.6% relates to asset renewal, and I want to keep a fixed eye on that, because it's been very clear in the feedback we originally had from Escosa that we had to do something about that. We've done something about it, and I want to make sure that we continue to head down that path. So that's my observation and brief summing up. But Councillor Davis, then Councillors Abraham, Zadeh and Cavada, if you have anything else to add.
Well, firstly, in my view, CPI is an inadequate metric to be using at all. It should be the local government price index, which is calculated by Adelaide University and which is applied across the sector. When it comes to a basket of goods, we're not buying milk and eggs. So CPI is what an average person would expect in their increase. For us, the conversation is about bitumen and concrete on a mass scale, not, and CPI in my view is quite an irrelevant consideration for us. I also don't agree with the separation of 1.5% growth from the general rates revenue. I find it hard to believe that for every additional property there is an exact amount of an increase in the cost of the City of Adelaide. I don't think that's the case at all. If you have an extra 10 properties in the City of Adelaide, you now don't have more libraries, you don't have more footpaths, you don't have more traffic lights, you don't have more parklands to maintain. It's the exact same amount. The only real increase is impact on footpaths or potentially rubbish collection. So I think that I'm concerned that the separation rates growth is using the best of an old method to then being brought into a new method and trying to have your cake and eat it too. So to me that says that there are other rises within the administration that we're not being told about, which is well above what I would consider to be the LGPR, which I'm not confident has been properly disclosed to us. I don't think that we should be increasing rates at 7.1%. I think we should increase our rates revenue from 148 by 3.5%. And I believe that the council should be aiming to target we're going to go after Canada in a minute, and then QSS. LGPI, which is the Local Government Price Index, when we're looking at rate increases. I also note, members, that we have to make this decision within the next couple of weeks before we're supposedly going out for a draft budget. So there is no time. I mean, I don't really see that there is an ability to delay the decision on inflation. I would support a 3.5% increase to the general rate revenue of 148.4 million, and that's what I would support, but nothing else.
And so just clarifying, that's excluding then any allocation to asset renewal?
I think that the council has a significant ability to save other expenditure, and I think that we can meet it within our current budget to fund our asset renewal programs at 100%. But we're not even close, right? Transport's at 85%, and Parkland's at 53%. So we're a long way off even reaching this proposed asset renewal plan. So I don't think it assists at all.
So can I just pick up on Councillor Davis' question around the 3 weeks for the updated CPI data, and then when we need to go out for a draft budget for consultation, can we just confirm the timing of those two items?
We'll need to take that on notice.
Okay, take that on notice.
It's in the slide. There's a timetable in the slide.
I won't run through that now. CEO wants to take that on notice, and we've got a few minutes to go. Any other councillors who didn't speak before like to ask any questions or provide any comments? Yep. That's a no. Councillor Button? No. Councillor Snape? That's a no. Members, that's a no. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll call the meeting closed at 6:28 p.m.